Please come down. Hello everybody, thanks for coming along on a very beautiful evening, but we have a draw here today. I'm very delighted to welcome the President of the CBI, Lord Bilimoria. MBAs here may be familiar with him already, and it's wonderful that they're coming back to see him. He is going to be talking about leadership in times of crisis, multiple crises I think we've had over the last few years, so that is a very topical question. So he will be talking about that and taking some questions as we go along. I'll have a word about the question procedure in a moment. In the meantime, I'd just like to say it's great to see you again. We go back about 25 years ago when you contributed to some executive education quite regularly that I was doing. And I think that's important because obviously you're an accomplished business person, an entrepreneur. Obviously, in your present role and many others, you've taken an important place in public policy, particularly with regard to the economy and business. But you're also a great contributor to education. You've been Chancellor of two universities, Thames Valley University and the University of Birmingham. You are, I hesitate to mention this, or you have been Chair of the Advisory Board at the Judge School in Cambridge. We can forgive him that, particularly because your degree is from Cambridge, so that's fair enough. And because you have compensated a little bit, at least by contributing to the MBA programme and other events here, and also been a fellow at Kellogg College. Matt, where's Matt? Here. There you are. You're being very polite and quiet for change. Who's another fellow of Kellogg as well and be joining us for dinner. So you've been a great contributor to Oxford's education as well. So in a moment you'll talk about leading in crisis. I'm just going to mention, and maybe it will flash up on the screen, the Q&A procedure, which will be familiar, terribly familiar to some people, but it's using Mentimeter. And that's partly because we're operating hybrid, and we got people in the next door room. So this is in order to give everyone a fair shot at questions. Ed, somebody is going to be feeding me the questions as they come along. So there's the Mentimeter thing, yes, the people who are familiar with the procedure are taking the photograph. And we will be reminded of that in a moment too. So don't worry about that. Karen, I think we should let you take the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. In January 2017, I attended a lecture at the Harvard Business School in which Professor Ravi Abdulal analysed the fault lines of Brexit and the election of President Trump, which had taken place the year before. And he concluded the lecture with a graph, which has remained imprinted in my memory ever since. It showed the rise and fall of globalization, starting after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, when globalization was rock bottom, and then throughout the 1800s it increased until the beginning of the First World War in the early 1900s when it peaked. And then that awful and tragic war that should never have taken place, which lasted for 4 years. There's a famous book written on the build-up of the First World War, which describes it like watching a train crash in slow motion. As a result of the war, globalization plummeted. It picked up a little bit after the First World War until the Second World War, caused by the First World War, and then globalization plummeted again to rock bottom. And since 1945, we've seen globalization continue to rise until January 2017, at the time of this lecture, when it surpassed the peak before the First World War. It was clear that if history was to repeat itself, as it often does, we were heading for conflict. And sadly, that is exactly what has happened with the tragic war in Ukraine, starting on the 24th of February, affecting not just Ukraine and Russia, but the whole world. In fact, the CBI annual dinner on 18th of May, the Ukrainian ambassador, Vadim Pristaiko, explained to me that currently it would take 5 years to get the grain out of Ukraine using rail and road, unless the Odessa port is unblocked. And David Beasley, executive director of the UN's food program, in May said that unless we unblock Odessa, the world will struggle to deal with an already catastrophic global hunger crisis, the World Food Programme now anticipates that in the countries where they operate, acute hunger could rise by 47 million people in the coming months. And government and business need to lead the way in international effects to unblock Odessa. I brought this up personally with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in our meeting with him on Monday with the B7, where I was representing the United Kingdom ahead of next week's G7. Is the Ukrainian ambassador here? He was due to come here, but he might be joining us shortly with his deputy Taras. We now live in an age defined less by globalization than by uncertainty, by rising protectionism, and by international instability. And I want to talk to you about some of the key lessons I've learned in these times by serving for 2 years as president of CBI. I'm proud to be a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford Said Business School Centre for Corporate Reputation, and I would particularly like to thank our director, Rupert Younger, as well as Professor Richard Whittington, for hosting us here in the Thatcher Business Education Centre. What better place to reflect on leadership in times of crises? I was appointed Vice President or President-elect of the CBI in June, a year ahead of taking over as President in 2020 for a 2-year tenure. It was an absolute privilege. The CBI is without question the UK's preeminent business organisation, speaking for 190,000 firms, including 200 of the leading trade associations from UK Finance to National Farmers Union. We're in every part of the United Kingdom and around the world, with offices in Brussels, in Delhi, in Beijing and Washington. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful team from the CBI, and it's been a privilege to work with them. In the past, some have described the CBI as a lobbying organization. I've never liked that term or description. Our role is much more significant. We lead the way, acting as a North Star for business and government. Being at the sharp end of business, the CBI continually identifies problems, usually well before the government is even aware of them. Then instead of going to the government with a begging bowl, we find and offer solutions that can be actioned at speed. Problem, solution, action. And that's the essence of what business and entrepreneurship is all about. And when I started as President-elect, I thought very carefully about my priorities. I thought, as a president who was supposedly breaking the mold. Not only was I the first president who had been an entrepreneur, I was also relatively younger, the first in a long time to be sitting as an active crossbench peer in the House of Lords, and the first ever ethnic minority president of the CBI. In fact, as a Zoroastrian Parsi, I'm part of one of the smallest ethnic minority communities in the world. There are just 100,000 of us. You've, of course, all heard about Freddie Mercury of Queen, the Tatars, and more recently, Cyrus and Adar Poonawalla of the Serum Institute of India, the largest vaccine manufacturers in the world even before the pandemic. And of course, Cobra Beer. I made championing the participation of all ethnic minorities in business one of my key priorities at the CBI. And to that end, I founded Change the Race Ratio, a campaign to increase ethnic minority participation in all businesses. And I'm proud to say that over 100 leading businesses and organizations have signed up. And we need to always celebrate diversity, never tolerate it. It has been proven that firms that embrace diversity and inclusion are more profitable and more innovative. And what immigration has brought to this country is absolutely extraordinary. Just 15% of the population. Look at what immigrants have added to the culture and economy of the United Kingdom. My other priorities looking ahead were to champion Global Britain, to promote entrepreneurship, and to promote universities and businesses working more closely together, particularly with regard to R&D and innovation. But, and here's the big but, did anyone see the pandemic coming? And no, the biggest crisis, global crisis we've had since the Second World War. And the scale of that crisis became clear in February and March 2020, even before I took over as president in June. I realized that one of the most useful qualities I would be able to offer was going to be my entrepreneurial background. This was not planned. And that, of course, came from my founding of Cobra Beer. I started when I was a student at the other place in Cambridge reading law. I was dissatisfied with the bland, bloating, fizzy lagers that were available, to accompany food. They just didn't go with any food, let alone curries and Indian food. And at the same time, I realized that real ales, which I love, and which are smooth and delicious to drink in a pub, are also too heavy and bitter to accompany food. So my solution was to produce a less gassy, extra smooth beer with a complex recipe and a globally appealing taste, which would not only be rounded, balanced, and eminently drinkable, but the best beer to accompany food ever. So that was the genesis of Cobra Beer, brewed smooth for all food. Problem, solution, action. So since 2001, Cobra Beer has been awarded 137 gold medals and is today a household name in the UK and exported to 40 countries. I'm sorry if I sound as if I'm boasting, but I am boasting with pride. And at Harvard Business School, they said, be confident but not arrogant. Be ambitious, be humble, be ambitious. And sure enough, my experience in building Cobra Beer from scratch over the past 3 decades, and all the ups and downs, including nearly losing my business 3 times, have proved invaluable in dealing with one crisis after another during my presidency. The pandemic, the economic strains in its wake, the war in Ukraine, as well as the ongoing twists and turns as we adapt to our new relationship with the EU after Brexit. So I want to talk to you about some of the key moments from that time, the lessons they reinforced for me regarding the great strengths and resilience of UK business and the action we need to take as leaders to help our great country compete and succeed in the next decade. It all starts with a message I received on the 26th of March 2020 from Professor John Quelch, 3 days after the UK lockdown began on the 23rd of March. I'd worked with Professor Quelch at the London Business School. He was a professor at Harvard Business School where he taught me, and he's now Dean of the Miami Herbert Business School. And in his message, Professor Quelch outlined his 7 C's for how leaders can manage through a crisis: calmness, confidence, communication, collaboration, community, compassion, and cash. And I kept a sticky note with these 7 C's at my side throughout the crises over the last 2 years. And with hindsight, he was spot on. Let's start with cash. In March 2020, just before the first lockdown, I was one of the first adopters. I was in bed with COVID. At a CBI board meeting by conference call from my bed, the former Director General, Carolyn Fairbairn, said, "Karen, you've been through tough times. What is it that business requires now?" Without hesitation, without blinking, I said, we're going into a lockdown. Businesses will be forced to shut, and what they will need more than anything else is cash to survive. They will need loans. It'll be tough enough to get a loan from a bank at any time, but amidst this great uncertainty, banks will be even less willing to lend. So I said the loans would need to be guaranteed by the government, and I went one step further and argued they needed not to be 80% guaranteed by the government, but 100% guaranteed for the money to flow. They almost laughed. I was told that will never happen. But in that case, I knew money would not flow and businesses would go bust. And the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme was launched with loans 80% guaranteed by the government, and sure enough, the money didn't flow. So I persisted. And at every opportunity in Parliament and in press interviews, I said we needed 100% government guaranteed loans. I noticed that Germany and Switzerland had launched 100% guaranteed loans for their businesses, and I brought this to the government's attention. And when I was on Question Time in April, I brought it up again and challenged the minister on television that the government had to act at speed to prevent mass business failure. Finally, the government listened, and 100% government guaranteed bounce-back loans were launched. Since then, over 1.6 million businesses have received these loans. The vast majority of SMEs within this 1.6 million, legitimate businesses seeking to do the right thing in tough times. With an average value of approximately £30,000, these loans have saved thousands of businesses across the UK. However, there were unquestionably gaps in the government support package, with the aviation industry as one example. Heathrow Airport, for instance, lost £4,000 million throughout the pandemic and only received £70 million of help from the government. Collaboration, the next C. The CBI worked closely with the government in every way throughout the pandemic, including in helping to formulate, adjust, and extend the furlough scheme. I remember the Chancellor made a speech in the House of Commons in which he announced reforms to the furlough scheme, and in it he mentioned the CBI twice in just 4 minutes. Another of the best examples of collaboration I saw during the pandemic was when the Prime Minister appointed Kate, now Dame Kate Bingham, an alumna of this university, to lead the vaccines task force. In May 2020 she was appointed, and the first vaccination was on the 8th of December. Absolutely amazing. The Vaccines Task Force transformed the model for how government, industry, academia, and the NHS work together collaboratively at speed to accelerate innovation. This enabled the UK to be the first country in the world to sign an advance purchase agreement for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. The next, the government also supported the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, developed by Oxford University in partnership with AstraZeneca, headquartered in Cambridge, who in turn collaborated with the Serum Institute of India, who produced over 2 billion doses. So what we've seen in this pandemic is dynamic regulation, regulation at speed, with the MHRA approving vaccines in months when it would normally take years. And the appointment of Nadeem Zahawi as COVID vaccine deployment minister was crucial, and he did such a fantastic job. But of course, the government didn't always listen to us. Communication and confidence. They didn't always listen to us right away. I learned about the cheap and fast lateral flow tests that were being developed in the United States. And in August 2020, so remember, March was a lockdown. Very soon after that, I began recommending to the UK government that it should start using these lateral flow tests to test individuals, and it should also give them access to business so that we could attempt to prevent mass isolation and lockdowns. I made this recommendation at every opportunity, in Parliament, in the media, in my speeches. I was battered away by ministers on a regular basis, sometimes very bluntly. But I persisted. After all, it is a trait of the entrepreneurs. You never give up. Entrepreneurs are defined by one word: guts. The guts to do it in the first place, and the guts to keep going when others would give up. So I persisted. And on the 12th of November 2020, I asked the question again in the House of Lords. I asked, why were we not making mass lateral flow testing available to businesses and the public free of charge? And the minister responded, Lord Bilimoria, you have totally won the argument. I nearly fell off my chair. It took several months, but free lateral flow tests were eventually made available to all businesses and citizens. In fact, they came to be used so widely that we ran out of them in December 2021 and January 2022. Oxford University carried out a study between April and June 2021 of 200 schools. It covered 200,000 pupils and 20,000 staff. One half of them were following the bubble rule. If you remember, at one stage, there were millions of school children isolating. The other half were regularly lateral flow testing, with only those who tested positive in isolation and everyone else carrying on with school. The results showed that 98% of those isolating in bubbles didn't need to, and 98% of those regular lateral flow testing didn't miss a day of school. I put it to you that if the government had listened to me, if the government had listened to the CBI in August 2020 and acted rapidly to introduce rapid lateral flow testing, perhaps we could have avoided lockdowns 2 and 3. What's more, the cost of providing these tests would have been minuscule compared with the £400 billion the government has spent saving our businesses and economy, let alone the cost on people's mental health, children losing out on time in school, the health issues as people missed out on operations, and even lives lost. Another area is treatments. In January 2021, we at the CBI began calling for the government to focus its attention not just on vaccines, but also on treatments. And as a result, we now have a full armory of against COVID, vaccinations, lateral flow tests, and antivirals. However, we need to continue to reform our health system, including social care. The pandemic clearly highlighted how much social care has been neglected in this country for years. Community and compassion. Throughout the pandemic, something else I noticed was the amazing sense of community and compassion. In my industry, for example, the thousands of Indian restaurants, we supply 7,000 Indian restaurants, curry restaurants, they were forced to close. Many would, even when they were closed, open their kitchens and unprompted prepare hundreds of meals and deliver them free of charge to their local hospital for the doctors, nurses, and staff. And we had a fundraising with the British Asian Trust, Prince Charles's charity for South Asia, raising money for COVID victims. Hundreds of restaurants opened up and joined that promotion. We raised a lot of money and awareness. When in April and May 2021, India had its tragic COVID crisis, we were approached by the Indian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Gayatri Sakumar, for help. India had run out of oxygen and people were literally dying. I convened the CBI's leading members and we set up a war room at the Indian High Commission and mobilized donations of oxygen cylinders, concentrators, PPE, medicines, monetary donations and more. And then the Indian High Commissioner said that of all the embassies across the world, the UK had helped the most due to the role that the CBI was able to play. This is business as a force for good. Fast forward to February the 24th this year when the sad war in Ukraine started, and the CBI was mobilizing business response again. Not only did we support the sanctions straight away, very soon many of our businesses were disinvesting in Russia, stopping investing in Russia, stopping exporting to, stopping importing from, stopping doing business with Russia. 2 days after the war began, I approached the Ukrainian ambassador, Vadim Prystaiko. We met on the 28th of February, and the next day we convened an emergency meeting of the CBI Presidents and Chairs Committee, and the Ukrainian ambassador and myself seated in Holland Park in the embassy, and a screen of the who's who of business leaders. Business helped without hesitation with monetary donations, staff secondments, cybersecurity support, and hundreds of different medical products and medicines. And since then, we've been helping non-stop. We have sent 3 million ration packs. Every male over the age of 18 has been conscripted, but they had no ration packs. We found the biggest supply of ration packs in the Ministry of Defense. We've sent 3 million ration packs. We've also coordinated a project which has sent over 540,000 food boxes to the food basket of the world where people were in threat of starvation. Each of these boxes enough to feed someone for a week. In fact, the ambassador said last month at a speech at our annual dinner that of the humanitarian support from around the world, I'm talking about humanitarian, I'm not talking about weapons here and armory, I'm talking about humanitarian support from around the world, 62% came from the UK because of the CBI's work. And I would like to take this moment to commend the Ukrainian ambassador, Vadim Prystaiko, who I've worked with personally, and his deputy, Taras, for their inspirational work. And I also want to thank my chiefs of staff, Peter Werner and Omar Singh, who are both over here, for their hard work throughout. Once again, this is business as a force for good. So it's no wonder that the Edelman Trust Barometer 2022 found business is the most trusted institution. Can you believe that? Isn't that marvelous? Calmness. This is the 7th of Professor Quelch's 7 Cs, because in the midst of so many serious challenges, the non-stop crises one after the other, and the uncertainty that it characterized since the Brexit referendum in June 2016, we've had to keep a level head. We've had to step up to find the right solutions. My late father, General Bilimoria, who's been in war, who's been in horrific situations, always said, in a time of crisis, be cool, calm, and collected. So how do we do it? How do we use these experiences that I've just spoken about to help us get through the 3 biggest crises facing the UK and keep our economy going? First, I want to talk to you about the economic crises that have beset the UK in the wake of the pandemic. In May last year, when I had the privilege as CBI President of chairing the B7 summit ahead of the hosting of the G7 by the UK, I remember we heard from the IMF's chief economist, Dr. Geeta Gopinath, and she said that with our £400 billion package to save jobs and businesses, combined with our world-leading vaccination program, we would bounce back rapidly and we would have a V-shaped recovery. That was May last year. Since then, we've had anything but that. We've had a fragile recovery. We've faced labor shortages, eye-watering inflation, including energy costs escalating, and a genuine cost of living crisis, all exacerbated by the sad war in Ukraine. With labor shortages, I remember last June 2021, in CBI speeches, in Parliament, I warned the government about labor shortages in many parts of the workforce, including butchers, welders, HGV drivers. I asked the government to act quickly and activate the shortage occupation list They did not listen. Eventually, they allowed lorry drivers to come for 3 months. Do you remember? But leave on Christmas Eve. We pointed out this would not work. And sure enough, very few applied. The government then did listen and extended the period, but by then it was too late. The damage was done. We asked the government to set up an independent body like the Low Pay Commission to set the shortage occupation list for each sector on a regular basis, depending on the needs of the economy. And that is something I recommend we should do, and the government should do. But there's some good news on the workforce. I'm co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Students and president of the UK Council for International Student Affairs. It looks after the interests of all international students in the country. And I was speaking to 2 of our international students in the MBA course just now, Asha and Jessica, and I'm pleased to say the government has now brought back the post-graduation work visa, allowing students to remain and work in the UK for 2 years after they graduate. I remember bringing this in and fighting for it in 2007, 2008 in the first place. It was removed in 2012, and now it came back on the 1st of July last year. We are asked for the government to have a target for international students. They set a target of 600,000 international students. In spite of the pandemic, we've beaten that target. And I've now set a new target of 1 million international students. And the Indian students are now rocketing. Chinese have always been the highest. I predict the Indians will overtake the Chinese soon. Outside of this bright spot, however, we must urgently address the UK's workforce and skills challenges for the sake of our economy and to ease the pressure on businesses. We need to add immediate flexibility to the apprenticeship levy, allowing all employers in the country to use their levy funds to tackle labour shortages. And talking about that, I personally believe we underfund our state schools. It costs approximately £5,000 a year for a child at a state school, and yet the 7% of children who are educated privately in this country spend 3 times as much. In the United States, 95% of pupils and staff are provided with a laptop or a tablet by their school, and here in the UK, we've yet to achieve full broadband coverage. There's a lack of digital access, particularly for children, and all this was highlighted in the recently launched Times Education Report, and I was proud to be a commissioner. Shortly, the CBI and I will be announcing a new scheme to increase school and business interaction, which will not only help businesses secure the future skills they need, but also empower and inspire the next generation. And we'll be writing to our members soon about how they can get involved. Watch this space. Beyond skills and labour challenges, we must recognise that in the last year, firms have also been severely affected by the cost of living crisis. Businesses have been doing their best to ease the pressure on consumers, but I know they are very, very worried. They're worried because there has been limited support to help businesses with inflation, which has soared to a 40-year high. Take the hospitality industry. During the pandemic, VAT was reduced from 20% to 5%, put up to 12.5%. Now it's back at 20%. They urgently need help again. And I personally believe they need VAT reduction to survive now for a temporary period. SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, are also being really squeezed at the moment. Their input costs are rising in leaps and bounds. Many components are doubling in price, not the headline figure of 9 and 10%, doubling. For many of them, this is putting a squeeze on their margins, especially those firms who are not able to pass on the cost increases to consumers. The government is doing little to help businesses at the moment. It started helping consumers recently, the £37 billion, including a windfall tax of £5 billion. We at the CBI have voiced our concerns that windfall taxes may not be the best means of doing this. We believe the open-ended nature of the levy and the potential of bringing electricity generation to scope will damage the investment needed for energy security and net zero. It sends a wrong signal at the wrong time against the backdrop of rising business taxation elsewhere. Windfall taxes are not the solution. And to top it all, we now have a government that has imposed the highest tax burden in 70 years. High taxes will hamper the recovery, will curb investment, and curb growth. It is imperative to have the right incentives to spur investment and growth. And in my personal opinion, I also think we should have a national target for GDP growth of, say, 2.5% to 3%. As things stand, the UK is forecast, this is the latest CBI forecast, hot off the press, and our chief economist is in the lecture room. As things stand, the UK is forecast to have only 1% growth in 2023, the lowest by far compared with the United States, 2.3%, Eurozone, 2.4%, Japan, 1.7%, let alone China at 4.8% and India at 6.5%. The government has already been bold with the introduction of the 130% super deduction, a vital move that the CBI research shows has supported capital spending, but this scheme is set to end in April next year. And unless there's a successor, the CBI forecasts the UK will remain the lowest in the G7 for business investment. So we're urging the government and the Chancellor to create a permanent 100% tax reduction for capital spending in the year of expenditure to incentivize business investment. And I've said this many, many times before. My analogy using tennis. I'm a keen tennis player. Maybe I may not be that good, but I'm keen. If you just imagine this. You take a backswing to hit the ball. You stop when you hit the ball. So that's 400 billion pounds. What's going to happen? The ball's going to go in the net. To get the ball over the net, you need to follow through. And that's what we're asking the government, is follow through. Look at the success of the recovery loan scheme. We must not lose that momentum now. We're asking the government to announce a permanent replacement to the recovery loan scheme to support cash flow, including for SMEs. To prevent businesses from going under, the government must act now before it's too late. Of course, we've got to balance the books, but that's for a later time. Now we need swift action from government. We need it to channel the spirit of the entrepreneur, to have the guts to seize the initiative. In the words of the Duke of Wellington, fortune favours the brave. And it's not just government's responsibility to invest, it's businesses as well. And that's why we welcome the Chancellor's ambitions to use the autumn budget to create the environment for business to flourish, in particular focusing on how the tax system can work to incentivize investment in people, capital and ideas. We want and need to be a high investment economy, one that's encouraging investment of all types, domestic and inward investment, private and where needed, public. And this is exactly what we need to be doing now to stimulate growth and ensure we move out of this low growth cycle. As Tony Danker, our outstanding CBI Director General, who's over here, has said, the government needs to stop focusing on Operation Save Big Dog and save the economy instead. Now, CBI has recommended several ways to do this. I would personally go further and consider exploring measures such as these. A 2% reduction in income tax now, not a 1% reduction in 2024. A 5p reduction in fuel duties. That's a drop in the ocean. We already have some of the highest fuel duties in the world. It's in government's hands to reduce the fuel prices substantially to help businesses and consumers, as several other countries have already done. And we need to reverse the 2.5% national insurance rises and also bring back entrepreneurs' relief. And I would review company listing rules and reforms to build on the work already underway and enable even greater investment by pension funds in various alternative investments such as private equity, which they're not allowed to do at the moment. This would inject billions of investment. All this would build on the CBI's calls for business rates reform, including the incentivize green investment. And what about now? These crises don't stop for me. Brexit, pandemic, Ukraine war, now strikes. We have the worst strikes in 30 years. I would hope the individuals involved would recognize that in the midst of a cost of living crisis, this is impacting people in all corners of the country. Disruption of this scale is the last thing needed right now. And all parties need to get back to the table and find a way forward quickly before the short-term impact does lasting, long-term damage. Brexit. The implications of leaving the European Union are still clearly with us even now. And we've seen in the last fortnight the issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol is far from resolved. I remember during the Brexit debate, I took part in it actively over the years from the time of the referendum and before, and I repeatedly said, Northern Ireland is a circle that cannot be squared. The only way is compromise to protect the Good Friday Agreement. And that issue needs to be resolved now. If only the UK and the EU could be practical and pragmatic, we could navigate the uneasy ideological barriers. We could find practical solutions to the implementation of the protocol together. With flexibility and compromise, we can find a political landing zone. And with insights from business, we can design durable, lasting solutions to ensure smooth trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. For example, if I use an analogy, we could have the equivalent of arriving at an airport and going through customs. You either go through the green channel, nothing to declare, or the red channel, something to declare. And we know that the vast majority of goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland are for consumption in Northern Ireland, the green channel. We need to resolve this issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol now so that business can get on. And although there are also huge markets to tap in around the world, like the growing markets of the Indo-Pacific, the reality is the EU is our biggest trading partner by far and on our doorstep. And although it may diminish over time in proportion, it will still be our biggest trading partner by far for this foreseeable future. The individual countries in the EU whose ambassadors I've dealt with as CBI President, many people don't realize this. The individual countries are some of our biggest trading partners, whether it's Netherlands, whether it's Germany, whether it's France. Yes, the United States is our biggest trading partner, but 7 out of 10 of our top trading partners are EU countries. That's the reality, so let's make the most of it. And the UK needs to do much better on exports generally. Even by the end of the next year, our exports are expected to remain 10% below their pre-pandemic levels. At the CBI, we've been playing a leading role in helping to make the UK a trading powerhouse. In the last 2 years, we've worked closely with the Department of International Trade to help roll over EU trade deals covering 69 countries before the end of the transition period, including the Canada deal, which went to the wire. And we're now working to produce more bespoke forms of some of these agreements, such as with Mexico and Canada. But on the other hand, the agreement that needs to be upgraded the most is the EU TCA agreement. But that cannot happen until we resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol. We've also worked closely with the Department of International Trade to secure the UK's free trade agreements with New Zealand and Australia, and we're involved in the ongoing India-UK negotiations. In fact, the former High Commissioner of Australia to the UK singled out the CBI team for praise for the work we did in securing that particular FTA. It is arguably the most modern, comprehensive free trade agreement in the world, covering goods, services, IP, movement of people, agriculture, digital, data, professional qualifications, and more. The other era-defining challenge that we still face is climate change. On this front, we've already achieved so much, but we have still so much further to go. And as CBI President, I was proud to host 2 CBI conferences on decarbonisation and to be present for 1.5 of the 2 weeks of COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in November last year. And what I saw at COP26, an event that is usually governments and NGOs, this time business was out in force in a big way for the first time in history. As a result, we had not just governments making commitments, but business making commitments. And I'm proud to say that 60% of the FTSE 100 have committed to net zero by 2050. And what's more, the CBI and Deloitte's Goal 13 platform showed that 79% of businesses believe climate is a mega trend. 89% of businesses have at least one climate-related target. What gets measured gets done. Another of the highlights for me at COP26 was to chair a meeting of transport leaders on Hydroflex, the world's first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train, started as a PhD project at the University of Birmingham and became a model in the department, and then at the world-leading Centre for Railway Research and Education. And as you heard earlier, I'm Chancellor of the University of Birmingham. The collaboration between the university, Governments Innovate UK, the rolling stock company Porterbrook, as well as 30 other businesses to develop what is the world first. And I chaired a meeting of global transport leaders on a moving hydrogen-powered train in Glasgow, and it was fantastic. So in innovation and in commitment, we have come far. But we must remember that however zealous and committed we are about climate change, it is a transition. The practical reality is we are still going to need to use fossil fuels, including natural gas, for years to come. This is not an on-off switch. But the future is green. The future is hydrogen for heating. The future is small modular reactors, which can be built and installed at speed. These small nuclear modular reactors, I've been told by a CBI member, an expert in nuclear power, can be built in less than 5 years, and each one of them can power a city the size of Sheffield. What are we waiting for? Let's start building them now. And the future is solar power, for which we can partner with countries like India. And the future is offshore wind power, in which we're already world leaders. And this green industrial revolution will create jobs and jobs and jobs. The UK, with Europe's most extensive capital markets and world-leading talent and financial services, now has a unique chance to become the world headquarter for net zero finance. And the Glasgow Financial Alliance said there is now $130 trillion of finance available to invest in sustainable projects. And we can attract this by introducing principle-based, internationally minded legislation on sustainable finance, and most importantly, outlining clear transition plans for different sectors. But we can't look at climate change in isolation. What about biodiversity? An independent review of economics and biodiversity produced by Professor Saparsa Dasgupta of the University of Cambridge, for which some predict he will get a Nobel Prize, that was published last year, described nature as our most precious asset and finds that humanity has collectively mismanaged its global nature portfolio. Our demands far exceed nature's capacity to supply goods and services we rely on, and the last few decades have taken a devastating ecological toll. Since 1970, there has been an almost 70% drop in the populations of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians. Almost 1 million animal and plant species, almost a quarter of the global total, are believed to be threatened with extinction. And on soil, we need to aim for at least 3 to 6% organic content in soil. We need to save the soil. Responding to the Dasgupta review, Sir David Attenborough, a national treasure, said, "It is the moral compass that we urgently need." Another vital tool is the circular economy. And on this, I can think of no better example than Cobra Beer, my own industry, where the waste malt from the brewing process is used as cattle feed. The waste yeast from fermentation is used to make Marmite. We use as little water as possible, and the wastewater is treated as effluent treatment, so it can be reused. Even carbon dioxide is captured and reused. I could go on. My fellow crossbench colleague and the former Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and President of the Royal Society, former President of the Royal Society, current Astronomer Royal, Lord Martin Rees, said, and I quote him, "Our planet has existed for 45 million centuries, but this is the first time in its history where one species, ours, can determine the biosphere's fate." And make no mistake, we can ensure that it is a positive fate, with businesses leading from the front. We're all now recognizing the global economic opportunity decarbonization can be. And research after research, McKinsey's reaching net zero by 2050 will take $3.4 trillion of investment a year on average in new low-emission vehicles, 1.7 trillion a year to make our homes green, 2 trillion a year of investment in power generation, distribution, and storage systems. These are huge sums of money that are required. And the UK can seize the opportunity of green products and services. This is where we can be the best in the world, and by doing so, be the best for the world. But productive change begins when you confront the brutal facts. We must embrace the Stocktail Paradox. We must maintain unwavering faith that we will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time, have the confidence to confront the most brutal facts of reality today. And one of my favorite sayings is, some people fail because of, while others succeed in spite of. And in spite of all the challenges we face, this country is still the 5th largest economy in the world. The result of phenomenal potential that's been forged over centuries. We have this amazing ability to be creative and innovative. We are 1% of the world's population. We have the finest universities in the world, like this, along with the USA. The United Kingdom had 4 out of the top 10 universities in the world in the recently released QS World Rankings, and 17 out of the top 100 were from the UK, including the University of Birmingham, where I'm proud to be Chancellor. So is it any wonder that we're world beaters at research? We're a research power. There's a British scientist who invented the World Wide Web while working at CERN. We have the highest levels of tech investment in Europe and growing. UK startups and scale-ups raised almost £30 billion, 3-0, in 2021, double the figure raised in Germany and almost 3 times that raised by French companies. We're one of the biggest producers of tech unicorns, billion-dollar startups in the world. And we still produce, with 1% of the world's population, 16% of the world's leading research papers. But, here's the but. The UK invests 1.7% of GDP in R&D and innovation, whereas Germany spends 3.1% and America spends 3.2%. Just imagine what we could achieve if we invested another £20 billion a year. Just imagine the increase in productivity. And we mustn't forget the incredible support given to research in this country by Horizon Europe and the international funding and collaboration they have supported. We can't delay in renewing our association with Horizon to supercharge the UK research, but we need to solve the Northern Ireland Protocol before we can do this. Despite our research strengths, there's another but. We also still, as I've said earlier, underfunded our schools. The original source of our education and innovation prowess, 1 in 4 school leaders predicted a deficit budget based on the amount of funding at the present, which already is very low. The pandemic has also brought to light significant education inequalities, so we need to explore in more depth vehicles for social mobility, including my personal opinion, grammar schools. We need an education system that encourages creativity and unleashes the potential of every child, as the Times Education Commission highlighted. And as well as innovation, we still have the most amazing production capabilities. Take manufacturing. Although manufacturing as a share of the UK's economic output has gone down from 30% in the 1970s to just 10% today, the UK is one of the world's largest manufacturers, in fact, one of the top 10 in the world. It is cutting edge, world-class, be it in automotives, aerospace, food, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, agriculture, beer. Or look at our professional capabilities. We have one of the finest financial service sectors in the world. We have the oldest democracy. We have the finest lawyers, the finest accountants, the finest creative industries. Music, we lead in rock, in pop, in classical music, in jazz. In film, we lead, where there's directors, actors, whatever part of films, we win Oscar after Oscar. In sport, we're the leaders. We invented a lot of the major sports played around the world, and we consistently bat above our weight. In the last Olympics, we came 4th and 2nd in the Paralympics. Our defense industry, we have some of the world's top defense companies, BAE System, Rolls-Royce. But, here's another but, we've consistently underinvested in our defense capabilities. In 2019, in the House of Lords debate on the NATO's 70th anniversary, I called for an increase in defense expenditure from 2% of GDP to 3% of GDP. And now, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that has become even more of a necessity. In fact, today, I believe, and I say this with pride, we have the strongest combination of hard and soft power of any country in the world. The top 3 elements of our soft power, the BBC. Almost 500 million people listen and watch the BBC every week. The Premier League, football, broadcast to almost 870 million homes worldwide, with the leading teams, hundreds of millions of fans. And the royal family, in particular, Her Majesty the Queen. How fabulous we've celebrated her Platinum Jubilee. She is a true service leader. She said to the people of the United Kingdom in a speech on her 21st birthday before she ascended the throne, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." So I believe we must now do everything we can to maintain our position in a changing world, to stay at the top table of the world, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, G7, G20, NATO. I believe the UK should join the Indo-Pacific Alliance, the Quad, which makes up India, Australia, Japan, and the USA, making it Quad Plus. Security and trade go hand in hand. So today it's clearer than ever that the UN needs to be reformed drastically. It has proven to be ineffective with respect to the Ukraine war. Russia and China have a veto on the Security Council. India is not even a permanent member of the Security Council. But if we maintain our pole position in the world, we can lead the reform that's needed. But there are several other steps. I think we need to be closer and have a close and stronger and trusting relationship with Europe. And we need regulatory alignment for financial services. We need to replace Erasmus, which is so fantastic for young people to travel in Europe, making the Turing scheme an equivalent, not just for outgoing students, but incoming students as well. So to conclude, in a changing world, in a world of instability and uncertainty, more than ever, our leaders need the confidence and the foresight to look ahead. I think we need vision, passion, and belief. And one of my greatest inspirations to me has been my great-grandfather in Hyderabad, who was a renowned entrepreneur and philanthropist. He looked after his family very well. He was a member of the equivalent of the House of Lords in India. And I have tried 4 generations later and been inspired to him to follow in his footsteps here in the UK. Another great inspiration to me has been my late father, Lieutenant General Bilimoria, who was Commander-in-Chief of the Central Army in India in charge of 350,000 troops. And he always said, son, the true test of leadership is not in the good times, but in times of adversity. And we have put that test to the extreme in the last 2 years, be it dealing with the pandemic or the sad war in Ukraine. And having nearly lost my business 3 times, with each time being entirely different, I know that you cannot always predict crises, but what matters is how you respond to them. Each time I nearly lost my business was different, but each time there were 3 things that consistently helped me get me through. 1, having a strong brand. Make no mistake, the UK has a strong, globally respected brand, a brand that is trusted. One of my Harvard Business School professors, Francis Fry, gave a lecture on trust, describing trust as a triangle of authenticity, logic, and empathy. The UK has all 3 in abundance. We're known for our justice, for our lawyers who are the best in the world, and people from all around the world, including celebrities, come to get the fairest trial. You need the loyalty of your team, your family. And again, although the UK is a country that doesn't have much natural resource, depleting oil and gas, for example, we do have the most talented, capable, and spirited people. And finally, you need integrity. Throughout my career, one of the key things that has got me through crises is integrity. And the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, described how the term integrity is derived from the Latin and Greek words integer and integrum, which mean wholeness. You cannot practice integrity if you're fragmented in front of the light. You can only practice integrity if you're whole and complete. And the UK has always been respected for its integrity. So in the UK, strong brand, people, integrity. But we need guts. We need boldness. Determination to always do the right thing. And as the famous schoolmaster, to play with a straight bat, Sir Henry Newbolt said, play up, and play the game. Fortune favors the bold. And to his credit, the boldness of Prime Minister Boris Johnson to be the first world leader on the streets of Kiev, to impose sanctions and send military equipment from the get-go. The boldness of the CBI to help the Ukraine in every way. And His Excellency, Ambassador Vadim Pristaiko, is here with us. Thank you very much for being with us. If we marshal these qualities I've discussed, there is no end to what we in the UK can achieve. I have a vision for this country. I'm a great believer in the power of our precious united kingdom to deliver for everyone, from Belfast to Birmingham, from Aberystwyth to Aberdeen, each and every region and nation bringing their own distinct strengths and culture, making us richer as a whole. We need to do more to make everyone feel that this is a place that they can live and work in and be proud to call home, everyone. We're a truly great country built on centuries of tradition, innovation after innovation, but we can be even greater by having a competitive tax system, having flexible labor markets that allow businesses to access the talent they need, investing, including in infrastructure, by building the innovative, high productivity economy that this country needs and deserves. And I know we can do it. Looking into the future, I can see the world's biggest economies, India, China, the United States, perhaps in that order. And the UK can be right up there with them. This is a vision that I can see that is crystal clear, a vision of the economy that we can be, a vision of the country that we can be, a vision of the world leaders we all here know we can be. And my vision has been to aspire and achieve against all odds with integrity. That's exactly what the United Kingdom has to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. That was invigorating and inspiring. Thank you very much. I'm sure that that will have generated many questions. We have a great format here of a room where it's easy to interchange. I might invite Karen to sit there, but you might prefer to stand as you wish. We do have, and somebody will probably flash it up again for me, a particular technology for, I've got some of it, here that Tiffany's reminding me about for submitting questions. So have we got the first one through? Tiffany, help me. I think the screen's gone a bit wonky. So perhaps we can take one question from the room in the meantime. Who would like to start us off? Please go ahead.
Karen, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think your call to boldness in this moment really resonated. Where would you propose the government cut
At this stage, it's more about actually creating the environment for investment and growth, because I really believe, as I said in my speech, growth is the future. There has to be more efficiency, and there's always scope for more efficiency. I mean, the NHS that we all respect and love so much, enormous scope for efficiencies within the NHS. So yes, there is scope for cutbacks, but I don't agree with cutbacks when you say I want to cut the civil service by 90,000 people, and then you say I'm going to cut the fast stream. What a lot of nonsense is that? The fast stream is 1,000 of the brightest people who go into the civil service. They're the future leaders of the civil service, and to try, and I mean, that is shooting yourself in the foot. That's being penny-wise and pound-foolish. Those are not the sort of cuts that you need. If you want to cut, you've got to do it intelligently to create efficiency. And that's Professor Kartik Ramana, the Blavatnik School of Government here at Oxford, so, and formerly Harvard Business School.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Now the technology is back. So the first question I've got, and I've got 2 or 3 questions, and I think we might allow ourselves to go 5 minutes over time, if that's okay. But I understand that people have commitments and so on and so forth, maybe travel as well. What is your tip? And if the person is in the room, please identify yourself. What is your tip on how leaders can remain resilient during turbulent times? So how do leaders remain resilient in these difficult, turbulent times? Is anyone in the room? That might have come in from next door or over the internet.
I mean, a lot of this lecture has been about that. And I think a lot of it has to do with having the confidence, the Stocktail Paradox, which is based on the story of Admiral Stocktail, who was a Vietnam prisoner of war for 7 years. And he survived where many of his colleagues didn't. And when he analyzed it afterwards, he said those who were too optimistic and thought it would be home by Christmas were often ones who didn't make it because they were too optimistic and then disappointed. Those, on the other hand, who just couldn't stand the horror, which was realistic horror, also didn't make it. He, on the other hand, had that faith that he would make it in the end, but he was also realistic to face the harsh reality day by day. So it's that combination of facing the reality day by day, but having that strength and conviction and vision and confidence and guts that you're going to get through to the other end. And that's what you've got to continually do in these times where it's one crisis after another. But if you don't have that vision and you don't have that ability to be trusted, and that's very important, the leadership needs to be trusted. And sadly, in the world at the moment, we've got a real lack of leadership in many parts of the world. And you know, you have to have a trusted leader with a clear vision who takes everyone with them.
So top tips, Stocktail Paradox and trust. Okay, the next question would be, what is the CBI strategy for helping British business overcome the disaster of Brexit? I didn't choose this one. Who's in the room? Is somebody in the room who submitted that? Okay, that came from probably next door or elsewhere. The strategy for overcoming Brexit in a couple of minutes.
We don't have the time to discuss. That Brexit is a reality. We've left the European Union. The point I keep making is we didn't have a no-deal Brexit. We had a Brexit with at least duty-free trade in goods across our borders, which is there. If we resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol, I'm very confident that we will be able to really improve the agreement we have with the European Union, which at the moment is a very light agreement. We can do so much more with financial services, with education. As I said, the Horizon scheme is a jeopardy at the moment. We need to save that Horizon scheme, which is collaborative research between European researchers and ours, which is benefiting both Europe and the UK. And the Erasmus scheme has gone. We've got the Turin scheme, but it's a one-way scheme. So there's a lot more we can do, but the Northern Ireland Protocol is absolutely key to resolve, and we need to do it now.
Northern Ireland Protocol. Thank you very much. Since you mentioned the Erasmus scheme, there's a question, I think, from one of the MBA students, either here in the room. Is the UK attracting intended international students? Our MBA class is comprised of students from 71 countries, which is quite impressive. We are mostly from privileged backgrounds, indeed, and therefore able to access opportunities. Does somebody in the room answer that? Please, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've had this discussion with Omar, I think, before. So
I can't see him.
There's a philosophical question about whether we're including those parts of the world that need us to include the most. With the vaccine, the weather involved is left behind a lot of the time. exclude Africa entirely. So I have a few guesses from South Africa, cases from South Africa, uses from Cote d'Ivoire. We're lucky to be in this group, but with especially the high-performing or high-potential individual visa, we're going to be leaving out Africans entirely. So is the UK going to be attracting the right talent? So this right diverse talent that you spoke about? And are we really attracting those people that we should be attracting? Are we creating opportunities for people who we should be creating opportunities for?
Yeah. And this is the point I made about immigration having contributed so much. I've led a debate in Parliament about it, how much it's contributed to the culture and economy of this country from around the world. And there's no question about that. But how do you attract the brightest and the best? How do you attract people who need to be here from a refugee point of view and make it not only welcome them here, but enable them to settle, integrate, and work over here? And I think we could do so much better. The points-based system is there. Is the point-based system making it easier for workers, talented workers, to come to this country? Arguably, yes. On the other hand, we hear the agricultural shortage of agricultural workers and their fruit rotting, and there will be vegetables rotting because we don't have the workers. So it's across the board that you need to have access, and people need to be able to come here to work and to study that our economy needs. No one is talking about open borders. That's unrealistic and should not be the case. But we do need that fair system. I'll give you another example. International students. There's a preferred list of countries where there are less rigorous immigration checks. It used to be just 12 countries like the Australias and New Zealand of this world. They increased a few years ago and added countries like China to that list. It's about 24 countries on that list. India's not on that list. So it is much more difficult to get a visa when you're from India compared with countries on that list. So I think we need to be much more equitable and fairer on this.
You've touched a nerve. Our dean is waiting for his visa to come through. So one last question, which I'm going to slightly edit, if you'll excuse me, whoever it is who asked. You described very vividly your experience during the COVID crisis. Sometimes your advice was listened to, sometimes it wasn't, or it took some time. Why do you think it was so difficult to penetrate the government's policy-making apparatus? And what have you learnt from your experience of the COVID crisis about leadership and influence during those times? Have you learnt anything from that experience over the last couple of years? Again, somebody may have asked that question. Well, I feel less bad about editing your question. But anyway, is that more or less the gist of it? Thank you.
Yes. I mean, the C's, one of them, collaboration. And I think you've got to have a collaborative spirit and attitude to this. What does not work, and let's be honest, before I took over as president of the CBI, the relationship between the government and CBI, because of Brexit, was not a good relationship. And a lot of what I had to do earlier on was build bridges with government. There's no point working with government if government's not going to listen to you. And what I realized very quickly is I could attack the government every day and criticize them every day. You should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Doesn't work. You've got to work constructively. And it's that problem, solution, action in a constructive manner that I found has worked. And being persistent. So when they didn't listen, you persist and you keep trying and you keep trying. Even when you're being sometimes rude, you keep your cool and you keep trying. And that persistence, working with rather than working against. If you start working against, you won't get anywhere. And I found that collaborative attitude is what has worked. And you have to be able to also have the boldness and the guts to speak truth to power. So no one's saying be nice all the time. I mean, in my speech, I've been very critical, but I've also given credit where it's due. And I think that's the way to work. And then everyone knows where they stand. We have such a great relationship. I'm sure our Director General, Tony Danker, would back it up. We have a wonderful relationship with Number 10, with the Treasury, with the Department of Business, with the Department of International Trade, with the Foreign Office. We have a great relationship across the board with the officials, as well as with the ministers and the cabinet ministers. And that's the best way to operate. And they respect that. And I think I'm very proud of the way we've been able to work in that manner. Before we conclude, if you could give me one remark. Was that the last question or any more? I just want to say a few words at the end, that's all.
Why don't you do that? Yes.
Yeah. Firstly, Richard, thank you and the CBI Business School very much for hosting this lecture. It's a privilege to be here with all. Thank you all of you for attending, and those in the room next door. It's a real privilege for me. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Ambassador, His Excellency Vadim Pristaiker. I mean, your leadership has been absolutely extraordinary. When I came to see you, literally days after the war had started, on the Monday after the war had started, you'd hardly slept, you and Taras, and you said the world doesn't realize that Russia thought they could walk in and take over this country in 2 days. We're not going to give up. We're going to fight. And look at that. In all those months later, you've continued to fight, and we've been privileged to be able to help you, and we are continually inspired by you. But the but is, as His Holiness the Pope said, in the name of God, please let this massacre stop. So we're all on your side and hoping this dreadful war, this dreadful aggression will end, and will end soon. And we are inspired by your bravery. And I will never forget one of the most memorable days in my 16 years in the House of Lords, where normally the Queen comes once a year, Her Majesty, to the House of Lords, and we're seated in our robes, and the House of Commons adjourn, walk over, stand at the back of the House of Lords, and Her Majesty the Queen addresses the only joint sitting we have as two houses. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, the state opening of Parliament, reads her Queen's speech. This time, on the 8th of March, after the war had started, we adjourned the House of Lords. We walked across, and we sat in the galleries, the House of Commons, with the MPs sitting in their seats below. And President Zelensky addressed us live from Ukraine. And it's a moment I'll never forget in my life. And he ended his speech quoting Shakespeare. And this is the essence of what it is. He said, to be or not to be, it has to be to be. So thank you for your inspiration. You inspire all of us.
Afterwards, to conclude on, and welcome indeed, and for our support. Thank you very much, Karen. That was an inspiring talk, as I said. We will be networking and drinking and chatting and chewing over all the material that Karen has given us next door in a moment. Okay, so thank you very much again.